All right, diving right in today. We're tackling something pretty fundamental to, well, just about every relationship we have arguments. You know, those moments when viewpoints clash. And let's be real, sometimes those clashes can get a little messy.
Yeah, definitely. Especially when the goal becomes more about proving ourselves right than actually understanding where the other person is coming from.
Exactly. And for our listeners today, those of you who are clearly interested in continuous learning and expanding your understanding, well, we're going to equip you with some really solid strategies to navigate those tricky disagreements, without letting things spiral out of control.
Right. We've actually been digging into a really interesting guide all about this, actually. It's specifically geared towards starting a successful YouTube podcast. It's called How to Win Any Argument Without Losing Friends.
So a YouTube podcast, huh? You might be wondering how that translates to, real life conversations.
And that's the thing. The strategies in this guide, they're surprisingly universal.
Hmm.
Whether you're debating with a friend, having a tough conversation with family, or even navigating a difference of opinion at work, these principles apply. It's all about communicating persuasively without compromising those relationships.
Okay, I like that. So in this deep dive, let's map it out a little bit. First, we're going to dissect why arguments so often end up in frustration. Then we'll unpack this guide's practical three-step approach to arguing more constructively.
And finally, we'll look at how to make your points memorable and engaging, all while keeping those connections strong.
Sounds like a plan. So let's start with the wreckage, shall we? Why do arguments so often go off the rails?
Well, this guide points to a few key factors. And one of the most common is that the argument shifts from the actual issue at hand to an attack on the person holding the opposing view.
Oh, yeah, you see that all the time. It's like the conversation goes from, I disagree with this point because, to, well, you're just the kind of person who would think that.
It's a total derailment. It becomes personal.
Mm.
Like, forget the issue. Let's just go after each other.
Right. And then there's this thing that the source calls the ego trap. It's like this primal urge to be right no matter what.
To win the argument, even if it means sacrificing understanding or the relationship itself.
It's like our brains are wired to defend our beliefs as part of who we are.
Absolutely.
And the stakes, they can be pretty high, right? Look at this statistic from the guide. Studies show 68% of friendships break because of arguments.
68%. That's huge.
It's a sobering thought, isn't it? It really highlights how crucial it is to get a handle on this. It's not just about scoring points. It's about preserving those connections.
Exactly. And that's where this three-step formula comes in. So step one, and I really love this, is called listen to win.
Okay, listen to win. That seems a little counterintuitive, right? When we think of arguing, we think about making our own case, not necessarily like deeply listening.
Right. But here's the thing. When people feel truly heard and understood, they become so much more open to considering your perspective.
Ah, yeah.
It's about active listening,
Yeah.
really paying attention, asking clarifying questions, even summarizing their arguments back to them to show that you get it. That validation, it can lower their defenses. It creates a space for them to actually consider your point of view.
I see. It's like building that bridge of empathy before you even try to present your side.
Precisely.
Okay, makes sense. So what's the next step in this formula?
Step two is what the source calls the Aristotle hack.
Ooh, I like that. The Aristotle hack.
Now, this is based on Aristotle's classic framework for persuasion. Logic, emotion, and credibility. Logos, pathos, and ethos.
The persuasive trifecta. Right. But how do you weave those into an everyday argument? It's not like we're giving a formal speech here.
You're right. It's about integrating these elements naturally. So logos is about using facts, evidence, sound reasoning. Pathos, that's about connecting with the other person's emotions and values. What matters to them, what resonates with them.
I see.
And ethos, well, that's about your credibility. Maybe comes from your expertise on the topic, your personal experience, or just simply demonstrating that you're approaching the discussion fairly and respectfully.
Gotcha. So it's not just about bombarding someone with data. You need to connect with them on that emotional level too. Show them that you've considered their perspective.
Exactly.
Okay. So we've listened to understand. We've used the Aristotle hack to make our case. And now, what's the third step? How do we ensure those relationships stay intact?
The third step is the exit strategy. And this is all about knowing when a debate is no longer productive and, more importantly, knowing how to gracefully bring it to a close.
That's so important. I think we've all been in those arguments that just go in circles and everyone gets more and more frustrated.
For sure. And nothing really gets resolved.
So what does a graceful exit look like?
It could involve acknowledging that you have different perspectives and agreeing to disagree, but The guy does get into some interesting nuances about that later on. Or you could shift the focus to something you do agree on. Suggest maybe revisiting the discussion later when everyone's cooled down a bit.
Okay.
Or just simply stating that you understand their point of view, even if you don't share it, and that you value the relationship more than winning.
I like that. Recognizing that sometimes the best way to win is to not actually try to win the argument, but rather to preserve the connection.
Exactly.
Okay, this all makes sense in theory, but how do we actually apply these steps in our everyday lives?
Well, the guide actually gets pretty specific. It talks about applying these principles to common disagreements we have with friends. You know, things like politics, financial decisions, relationship dynamics.
Oh yeah, those can get intense.
Right.
Right.
And in those situations, think about how you can practice listen to win, genuinely focusing on your friend's reasoning, even if you disagree. And then consciously using the Aristotle hack. Not just stating your opinion, but explaining the logic behind it. Maybe sharing a personal experience that connects emotionally to the issue. And demonstrating that you've thought about things from different angles. You're not just stuck in your position.
And it's interesting because these strategies can work even in the workplace.
Exactly.
Like when you have a disagreement with your boss.
Even with those different power dynamics, the core principles are the same. Listen to understand their perspective. Frame your argument in a way that's logical and respectful. And be open to compromise.
And here's a fun little tip from the guide. To make these concepts stick, try applying them to a lighthearted, relatable scenario.
Oh, I love this.
The example it uses is the classic pineapple on pizza debate.
Ah, yes, the age-old question.
Right. It's a low-stakes situation, but you can still see how the ego trap comes into play. People get surprisingly passionate about pineapple on pizza.
It's true. And it's also a perfect opportunity to practice active listening.
Meh.
Really try to understand why someone might actually enjoy pineapple on their pizza, even if it seems totally bizarre to you.
It's about getting beyond your own immediate reactions and digging a little deeper.
Exactly.
Okay. We've talked about why arguments go wrong. We've equipped you with this 3-step formula for more constructive disagreements, and we've looked at some practical ways to apply it. So what are the key takeaways here? What do we really want you to remember?
The main point is this. You absolutely can navigate disagreements effectively, and you can do it while preserving, even strengthening, your relationships. It comes down to a few things. First, prioritize genuine understanding through active listening.
Okay.
Second, use a well-rounded approach to persuasion. Think logic, emotion, and credibility. And third, be self-aware. Be strategic. Know when to step back from a heated debate in a way that respects the other person and the relationship.
And that last point, that exit strategy, it's so crucial, isn't it? It's not about backing down. It's about recognizing when continuing the argument will do more harm than good.
Right. And that actually brings up a point the guide makes about being controversial but friendly. And it got me thinking, is agreeing to disagree always the best approach? Or are there times when it's more valuable to really push for understanding, even if it's uncomfortable? Could that lead to stronger connections and a more nuanced view of the issue for both sides?
That's a really good question. It makes you think about the different levels of winning, right?
And building on that, the guide also touches on the use of sarcasm in arguments.
Oh, yeah.
Often it's a sign that the argument is already headed south.
It can be a bit of a defense mechanism, can it?
Right, like a way to subtly express superiority or deflect from the real issue. But it can really undermine the possibility of having a constructive conversation.
Yeah.
So for you, our listener, think about your own communication patterns in arguments. Do you resort to personal attacks when things get heated? How often do you prioritize being right over understanding the other person's point of view?
Yeah. It's really about that self-reflection.
And how can you put these strategies into practice? Active listening, logic, emotion, and credibility. Knowing when to step back. How can you use these tools in your next disagreement?
Great questions to ponder. So to wrap up this deep dive, remember those key strategies.
Actively listen to truly understand the other person's perspective.
Use a balanced approach to persuasion, considering logic, emotion, and your credibility.
And have a clear exit strategy, knowing when and how to end a debate in a way that protects your relationships.
Because ultimately, those relationships are what truly matter.
On that note, I leave you with this thought. When all is said and done, what's more valuable? The temporary satisfaction of winning an argument, or the strength and depth of your connections with the people in your life? Something to think about.
Absolutely. Food for thought.
For sure.